Good evening. My name is Katie Rankin, and I am the Education Coordinator at the Edith J. Carrier Arboretum. We are so pleased to welcome you to our 19th annual Francis Litten Botanical Lecture with speaker Lauren Taylor of Blue Ridge PRISM. If you're here with JMU's Passport program, we're so excited you're here to learn with us. Your stamp will be available after I make my closing remarks, after the lecture, in the other side of the ballroom over there. Many of you are already friends of the Arboretum, but we also have a number of students and others who may not be familiar with us. So the Arboretum is just over there. It's a public urban garden and forested green space on JMU's campus. It preserves native species, it provides opportunities for research, and it promotes knowledge of the botanical and natural world for everyone. And we're here to inspire outdoor engagement through our woodland sanctuary, and tonight's event is going to help us with that. We also have many events and programs throughout the year besides this one. So you can see the flyers that are on the tables in either room. You can sign up for our newsletter. There's a newsletter sign up on this table as you go out, or you can check our website at any time. It takes many hands to keep the Arboretum going and growing, so I'd like to acknowledge the Arboretum staff that's here right now, most of whom are shy and hiding. Owen Hartwig and Megan Bell are landscape managers. Ivy Makia is responsible for the vast majority of tonight's event, so we thank her. And Janice Tross, our volunteer coordinator, who is always a faithful assistant and wise advice giver. We also would like to acknowledge that we have several of our regular volunteers here, and we could not do what we do without them. So if you are a volunteer at the Arboretum, would you raise your hand so I can acknowledge you? If you'd like to join them in volunteering, you are welcome to sign up via our website or talking to any of the staff. Our particular goal this year is to expand our community of supporters and members. So if you're already an Arboretum member, would you raise your hand? Thank you very much for your support. We'd like to encourage everyone else to also join in our mission and help support our facility and programming by becoming a member this year. Members enjoy discounts on paid programming, plant sales, a members-only early plant sale day, and reciprocal admission benefits to over 360 botanical gardens and arboreta around the country. And this year we have a student membership for the first time, as well as a new patron level that offers additional reciprocal admission benefits to museums around the country. You can support us through the link on our website and learn more about those membership levels and benefits, or take advantage of the opportunity to contribute to our cause through JMU Giving Day, which officially is February 27th, but you can follow that link now and make a gift now and unlock some matching donor opportunities. And now, I'd like to introduce you to tonight's speaker, Lauren Taylor. Lauren Taylor is the Executive Director of the Blue Ridge Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. That's where the PRISM comes from. It's Virginia's first cooperative weed management area. Covering 12 counties and 3.6 million acres, Blue Ridge PRISM provides education, outreach, and training for land stewards, community groups, students, HOAs, and volunteers across the Commonwealth. Lauren's journey with invasive plants began a decade ago as a volunteer with Conservación Patagonica, helping build the new Patagonia National Park, one of the largest grasslands restoration projects in the world. In the United States, her experience with invasive plants includes extensive volunteering with removal on both public and private lands. Lauren received her MBA from the Darden School of Business at UVA, and she contributed public comment to the 2021 Virginia Invasive Species Working Group sessions, including a cost estimate for removing invasive species from the retail trade in Virginia. She's the author of the Stop Home Depot from Selling Invasive Plants petition campaign on change.org, and in 2022 launched the Just Say No at Home Depot campaign. She's an avid hiker and gardening enthusiast and has built an invasive plants identification and control web app that can be used in the field for the 103 invasive plants on the Virginia Invasive Plant Species List. Lauren is also the founder and owner of Beloved Brook Natives, a local ecotype native plant micro-nursery in Greene County, Virginia, where she lives with her 2 English Shepherd rescues. Please join me in welcoming Lauren Taylor.
How's that? Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Because we're going to go fast. So we have a lot to cover. The topic that we selected tonight, invasive plants, biodiversity, loss, and climate, and how we can restore our natural world one vine at a time, and we're going to cover a lot of ground. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that this event is being held on the traditional lands of the Shawnee, Manahoac, and Monacan people. As we gather to learn how to better steward this land, we acknowledge your ancestors, the original stewards, and pay our respect to elders both past and present. We acknowledge who you are, your forests and your rivers, this land where your people came from. You know, as human beings, we listen in funny ways. We listen for, what does this have to do with me? And what's in it for me? And so, if you walk away tonight and you remember only 3 things, what I want you to remember is invasive plants are all around us. They directly and indirectly impact your life, the quality of your life, and the future of your children and grandchildren. And we are the cure. Say it with me. We are the cure. All right. So we're going to start out talking a little bit about plant blindness. How many of you are familiar with this concept? So this term was coined in the late 1900s, and it's this idea that plants, we overlook them. We don't see them as that valuable, even though they're the building blocks of everything, the vast majority of carbon storage units, and it's what allows us to walk out our door and get in our car and head on our commute. This happens to be the John Warner Parkway in Charlottesville in Albemarle County, and what you're looking at is an entire wall of nothing but kudzu. You've heard kudzu referred to as the vine that ate the South. You're looking at it right there. And people drive this route all the time and they don't realize it. This is the GW Parkway. And this one's personal to me because as a little girl growing up in Northern Virginia, my dad would drive this road and sometimes I got to go with him, commuting from a rural area into the city. And I always thought of it as just the most beautiful parkway. And what you're looking at there, as the commuters are coming in, if they stopped to look, it's a wall of invasive boursoneberry. Nothing but boursoneberry, smothering all of the trees along the GW Parkway. Or if you're in the Tony community of McLean and you're on your way in toward Arlington and you're driving on Old Dominion from the center of town and you cross over this little bridge over the Pimmet Run Stream Valley, part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And if you happen to turn to your right and look toward the west, what you see is this entire stream valley is Japanese knotweed, and all of the trees are smothered in boursoneberry. It's an alien, it's almost like an alien scene, an alien landscape, and yet people drive by every day, don't even realize that something is amiss. This is the exit from 29 as you head to Fontaine Research Park at UVA, and this makes me cry every time I take this exit and head down to the forestry offices. This is a hot mess of invasive species. Virtually everything you see that is green in this photograph is an invasive plant. There's a couple of native pines hiding in there, maybe some oaks, but what you're really looking at is honeysuckle, mimosa, bittersweet, horsemanberry, multiflora rose, tree of heaven, and on and on and on. And again, we drive by it every day not realizing what we're seeing. Or this scene from last spring in southern Albemarle. We've had an explosion of Japanese and Chinese wisterias that are killing our trees. And people are driving by and not noticing. This is a 29 corridor. All of these trees underneath this wisteria are dead or dying. This is ironic to me. This is McIntyre Park in Charlottesville, Albemarle, nature trail, right? What are you actually looking at? That is a wall of Oriental bittersweet. What happened to the nature? And in a couple of weeks, this is exactly what you're going to see driving around. This photo was taken almost exactly a year ago. This is autumn olive invading a forest in Greene County. The same thing you could be seeing here in Rockingham or Augusta or any of the other counties in which we work. But I want you to remember this picture because we're going to come back to this. It's easy when you drive by to look at this and think, oh, thank goodness, green, winter is almost over, the leaves are coming out, and we start to feel renewed and refreshed until we realize what's really going on. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Same thing here. This stream valley is invaded with Hemerocallis fulva, or tawny daylily or orange daylily, an iconic wildflower of our childhood. I was devastated to learn that this is also an invasive plant. Not yet officially listed in Virginia, but listed in 5 states around us. If you get up close to this, what you see is it is growing so densely and so matted that nothing else can grow in here. This is what we call a monoculture. Nature abhors a monoculture. We're going to come back to this photo as well. Or you might be hiking and you might see this. This is lesser celandine, a carpet, and you might think, oh, what a pretty, scene with these yellow spring flowers, until you realize what this area is actually supposed to look like and the damage that this lesser celandine is doing. Here's Chinese privet invading the woodland, and the same scene you're going to see. This could be Albemarle County just in the next few weeks. All of this is going to start to green out. And again, the Bradford pear, you'll be seeing that. So who is Blue Ridge PRISM? Mentioned really briefly, PRISM, Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. The generic term, cooperative weed management areas. There are approximately 100 cooperative weed management areas across the country. Sometimes they're called PRISMs or CISMs or CISMAs, depending upon where you're at. In New York State, there is a network of 8 PRISMs. Every county in New York is covered by a PRISM, and that's what we would like to see here in Virginia. We have a nascent stage PRISM forming over in the Northern Neck, and a small group is now forming in Fairfax County. They are calling themselves the Tree Rescuers. This is as of last week, so this is very exciting. Tree Rescuers, a Northern Virginia PRISM. We have a National Capital Region PRISM. But Blue Ridge PRISM has been around since 2014, and for the longest time we were the first and only. So we've been the go-to for information and education and advocacy about invasive plants in the state. We operate in 12 counties on the ground. However, we cover the state in terms of education through webinars and advocacy, et cetera. So 3.6 million acres, 200,000 of which are Shenandoah National Park, and eventually we'll pick up those remaining 2 counties up in the northwest corner, and would be 14 counties. But again, this is a regional effort, not state. There are no PRISMs that are statewide. It's always a regional effort. So we hope to see every county in Virginia covered by different PRISMs. Our core purpose is to improve the health of our natural world for future generations. That's why we get up and do what we do. We do that through educational events like this one, through tabling, through site visits on private and public properties, through educational webinars, through on-the-ground field training sessions, through leading work days of volunteers. We produce weed alerts, fact sheets, white papers, educating our legislature. And most recently, December before last, we gathered 85 different partners from across the state for a 3-day workshop in Charlottesville, the outcome of which is the Virginia Invasive Plant Coalition, which is being run as a program by Blue Ridge PRISM with its own website, on which, under the resources tab, you'll find all kinds of information, everything and everything you would like to know about what can we be doing about invasive plants in Virginia, as well as resources on our website as well. So what are invasive species? This is a controversial topic that people like to argue about, but we are working off of the legal definition. Yes, there's a legal definition of invasive plants, invasive species. Executive Order 13751 from 2016, which was an update to Executive Order 13112 from 1999. Invasive species means with regard to a particular ecosystem, and that phrase is very important, a non-native organism whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human, animal, or plant health. The update in 2016 added the words animal or plant health. Originally, the law just said human health. So we're taking everything into account now. You may hear other terms thrown around, non-native, alien, alien invasive, non-native invasive. We simply use the term invasive plant, invasive species, and this is the legal definition that we're working off of. So key number one for our purposes here in Virginia, it was not here pre-European contact. Key number two, it causes harm, either economic, environmental, human or animal plant health. And I'm going to go back to the idea of a specific ecosystem very quickly because, for example, our eastern red cedar, which is very popular here in Virginia, very common here in Virginia, does not belong in the prairie states. So when you talk about invasive plants, it doesn't just mean that it wasn't here in North America, it's that it migrated probably through wagon wheels or through car tires or birds. But invasive red cedar, the eastern red cedar, has gotten into the prairie states and it's wreaking havoc there where it doesn't belong. Same thing with black locust. I've been doing it's perfectly fine here in Virginia where it belongs. So how do they cause harm? They form monocultures, they blanket the grounds, they crowd out native species, they clog waterways, they strangle and smother our native trees, they release toxic chemicals into the ground, a process called allelopathy. They prevent native seeds from germinating, they stop forests from regenerating, and much, much more. Just going to give a few quick examples. So economic harm. Here's a Bradford pear, a species named Calorie pear, was marketed as a sterile cultivar, but Calorie pear cross-pollinated with pear trees from orchards and pear trees in the wild, and it regained its fertility, or as they say in Jurassic Park, life finds a way. So this is what we see now in this springtime. This is a farmer's field gone fallow, and the Calorie pear comes up, renders this field unusable. There are thorns on these trees that are up to 3 inches long and can puncture a farmer's tractor tire, costing them thousands of dollars to replace. Environmental harm. Everybody loves the beautiful draping purple flowers of Japanese wisteria, but when it escapes into the wild, it looks like this in our eastern forests. This photo I took is particularly personal, and we're going to come back to this one as well. Again, here's Chinese wisteria along the 29 corridor, strangling all of the trees. The vines on these can be absolutely monstrous, like boa constrictors. I've had foresters tell me they've seen wisteria rip mature trees right out of the ground. I've seen them bend them over completely to the ground. Harm to human and animal health. One example is Japanese barberry, a very popular landscaping plant. Everyone loves the crimson color. The Japanese barberry escapes into the wild, creates a thorny monoculture on the forest floor, and it creates a microclimate that harbors the ticks that carry Lyme disease. So imagine how this is spreading to all the animals and to humans and to your dog who goes running through this mess. What we're not talking about is plants that may have been brought here through human activity but have naturalized, but they never form a monoculture. So these are plants that people love to hate. People love to hate on dandelions, but dandelions are not causing economic harm or harm to human or animal health. They may be a nuisance in your lawn and you may want to get rid of them, but they are not invasive. We're also not talking about native plants that people love to hate on, like our native trumpet creeper or trumpet vine. Yes, it spreads quickly, but it co-evolved with our native flora and fauna. And if you see trumpet creeper in the wild, it actually plays very nicely with others. It's only when you remove it out of the wild and you let it try to grow in your yard or on a structure that it will cause damage. And we do encourage people, keep this away from structures. How did they get here? So human activity is the #1 cause of how they reach another continent, either intentionally, like kudzu on the left, which was brought here as an ornamental and then planted for roadside erosion, or unintentionally, like Japanese stiltgrass on the right, which arrived here not that long ago as dried packing material in shipping crates from Asia. And they thought that what they didn't realize is that hiding in the sheath where the leaf meets the stem is another layer of seeds. And those dried seeds escape the packing crate, and now we have a Japanese stiltgrass nightmare across half of the United States. So a little context goes a long way. This is information that I thank Kevin Heffernan, who's the stewardship biologist for the Department of Conservation and Recreation here in Virginia. He manages our invasive plant list, which we'll talk about in a minute. But he told the story, and it's really jaw-dropping and eye-opening, so I'll share it with you. There's approximately 400,000 plus or minus species of plants identified on the planet. Approximately 18,000 of those are native to the North American continent. Since Columbian contact, humans have intentionally or unintentionally brought 30,000 new species onto the North American continent. Of those 30,000, approximately 5,000 have escaped cultivation. So no, your peonies are not invasive and we're not worried about them. Your tulips are not invasive and we're not worried about them. But of the 5,000 that escaped into cultivation, approximately 925 or so have been identified as invasive in one of the 50 states, one or more of the 50 states. Let's take that in. Take a deep breath. Since the Jamestown settlement, we dumped 30,000 plant species into a continent that previously only had 18,000. And those 18,000 had millennia to co-evolve with wildlife in their respective ecosystems. This is what happens when a plant arrives in an ecosystem and has not co-evolved. This is kudzu, the vine that ate the South. This is why we are where we are today. So how do they spread? They are prolific seeders. A mature tree of heaven, female tree, can produce over 300,000 seeds in one summer season. They have tenacious rhizomes. Coven grass mats upon itself, getting deeper and deeper and spreading widely. You can't dig it out. It requires a multi-year regimen of really nasty chemicals and fire to try to get rid of coven grass, which is just beginning to appear in southern Virginia, working its way up from the south. They have rampant runners. Wisteria climbs for the light, but when it can't find the light, it also spreads runners hundreds of yards across the forest floor, setting down taproots at nodes and sending up a new plant at each of those locations that then becomes a shrub that then tries to ladder its way up to the light where it can flower and fruit. Sneaky fragments. Japanese knotweed can regenerate from a fragment the size of my pinky fingernail. So we tell people, don't ever cut Japanese knotweed. Don't ever weed whack Japanese knotweed. Don't use mowing equipment on Japanese knotweed. All you are doing is creating a forest of Japanese knotweed wherever those little fragments end up. So humans brought these plants here, but we have some assisting in spreading them. Common vectors are birds eating the berries and pooping them out in the woods, the wind blowing the seeds, deer picking up the seeds in their hooves or sticking to their fur, like wavy leaf basket grass, dogs, same thing, bears, other animals. Your shoes, the treads of your shoes when you go hiking, tire treads. The project I was doing in Patagonia, we were treating common mullein, most of which had arrived in Chile through the tire treads of visiting vehicles. Through waterways, Japanese stiltgrass is washed downhill in the slopes of Shenandoah National Park, and through runoff in ditches. Sometimes little plants like Lesser celandine have these little bulbils attached to the roots, and those break loose and they wash off down the waterways. These plants are opportunistic. Very little, if anything, eats them. They leaf out early, as you saw from those other photographs, and they retain their leaves longer, giving them a competitive advantage in the environments where they move into. So how is this impacting biodiversity? Who can tell me what the #1 cause of extinctions is? Habitat loss. Again, imagine if this picture wasn't taken on Parkway in Charlottesville, but it just as well could have been taken there last summer. Imagine you're a bird and you're trying to find a place to nest in a tree. Imagine you're a squirrel trying to find a place to nest in a tree. Imagine you're a deer and you're trying to make your way to a waterway or trying to find a place to bed down in this mess. Or a fox, or any other creature that belongs in our eastern temperate forests. What are you going to do with this? Insects here do not eat kudzu. Goats will eat kudzu if you allow them, but it doesn't stop it from spreading again from the ground. So this is causing dramatic habitat loss. It's estimated that there are approximately 7.4 million acres impacted by kudzu in the United States. It started as the vine that ate the South, but as you can see from this map from my naturalist, it has made its way all the way up into Canada. And if that wasn't bad enough, we have kudzu's evil twin, porcelainberry, which they're now referring to as the vine that ate the North. Porcelainberry was brought here as an ornamental. It was prized for its beautiful jewel-tone berries, and unfortunately the birds like to eat these berries and spread it far and wide. It's also mistaken for our native grape, and so people tend to look at the leaves and just ignore it. So in 2023, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, otherwise IPBES, released their report. They found that there were over 37,000 invasive species worldwide. Now that's all taxa, not just plants. But approximately 200 new invasive species are being reported worldwide every year. And most importantly, they found that 60% of extinctions were directly or indirectly related to invasive species. Let's bring it back home. These two photographs, remember I showed you the one on the top? I took these two pictures March 30th of last year, 1.5 miles away from each other in Greene County. The first one was the side of a hill on a farmer's property where the forest was invaded by autumn olive. The second is a forest that was relatively pristine. Yes, it had some overbrowsing by our white-tailed deer, but it was an uninvaded oak hickory forest. So on the exact same day, the bottom photo is what our Virginia temperate forest should look like on that day. It's too early for us to be seeing these leaves leafing out. So as you're driving around the spring and you start to see all of this leaf out, I want you to be questioning, are those native plants or are those invasive shrubs? If it's the middle of March, 99% chance those are invasive shrubs. Why do we care? What difference does this make? That autumn olive is shading the soil. It's preventing the sunshine from warming the soil and preventing our forest from regenerating. We take our trees for granted. They live a long time. They live longer than us. And so we look at our forests and we think they've been here forever. They're going to be here forever. But every tree has a lifespan, just like we do. And while our grand oaks may live for 400 or 1,000 years, the majority of our trees maybe live 60, 80, 125, 150 years, and then they die. And that's part of the process. And so they're constantly dropping seed material into the soil. A forest should be a mix of mature trees and young saplings and seedlings. And when you have this autumn olive growing and shading out the ground, no seeds can regenerate. And so what will happen without intervention, if we don't remove this autumn olive, one by one, maybe not during our lifetime, maybe during our children's lifetime, these trees will die and there will be nothing to replace them. And our forest will be nothing but a thicket of autumn olive, which provides no ecosystem services for our native ecology. Burning bush is another ubiquitous landscaping plant all across Virginia. People love the crimson magenta leaves in the fall, but when it escapes into the wild, this is what happens. So it's also completely covering the forest floor, preventing any regeneration. You notice how you see almost no trees of a caliber less than 1 inch in this photograph. There's no new trees coming up, and there won't be any unless this burning bush is treated and removed. So the photo on top, remember I mentioned that that's an invaded floodplain. I took these pictures almost a year ago. This was a stream crossing, Swift Run in Greene County. And a documentary film team had reached out to ask me some questions about daylilies. I don't know how many of you know this, but daylilies just hit the 100,000th cultivar worldwide. It's the most cultivated garden plant on the planet. Who knew? I didn't know until they called me. They wanted to know what I thought about daylilies. And I said, well, let me talk to you about daylilies. And shortly after that conversation, I happened to drive past the scene and pulled over to the side of the road to start taking some pictures and show them. Let me show you what's happening with daylilies in our counties here. So the lower photo is what an uninvaded floodplain in Bull Run Park in Northern Virginia looks like on that exact same day. You're looking at our beautiful, beloved Virginia bluebells in that photo, and while it may look like a monoculture, it's just the camera angle. If you were to get up close, you would see dozens of native wildflowers interspersed amongst each other, spring claytonia and so many others. And that is what that floodplain is supposed to look like on that day in Virginia in the Piedmont. Why do we care? Because there are over 4,000 species of native bees on the North American continent. 400 of them are native to Virginia. Some 25 to 40% of our native bee species are specialist bees. That means that they can only nectar on one species or one genus of flower. That's the only thing they can gather their food from. Some of these little native bees are the size of my fingernail. They're so tiny, the fingernail sliver. They're so tiny that you only see them when the sunlight glances off their wings. And when they wake up in the spring, the first thing they need to do is find nectar. And these tiny little native bees can only fly the distance of 1 to 2 city blocks. And if they don't find that one flower that they need to nectar on, because the ground has been completely covered in invasive plants, they die. And then the flowers that rely on them to pollinate them, they die. And everything begins to unravel, just like pulling the thread on a sweater. And the whole ecosystem, little by little, right before our eyes, under our noses we don't even realize, is beginning to fall apart. I like to tell the story, a tale of two arrowwoods that I heard from Maddie Bright, who is the executive director at Ursanga, which is one of the largest native plant nurseries up in Northern Virginia. If you ever have the privilege to shop there, they are fabulous. We were doing an invasive removal day at Marie Butler Levin Park, and we were pulling linden arrowwood from the forest. So in this photo, you have our native southern arrowwood on the left, and the invasive linden arrowwood on the right, and Maddie shared the story. The way I like to phrase it is that we as gardeners are obsessed with shiny red objects. We as humans are obsessed with shiny red objects. Ferraris, cherries, you name it. We like shiny red objects. So at some point, somebody thought that southern arrowwood was boring with its sort of dull, musty-colored, deep purple berries, and they decided it was a good idea to bring in linden arrowwood, which is now hard to find in commerce, thankfully, but has escaped into our woodlands and is wreaking havoc. It's crowding out the southern arrowwood. It's now very hard to find southern arrowwood in our forests, and instead you find these huge patches of linden arrowwood. So what? Who cares? Well, as it turns out, if you take a southern arrowwood berry and you squish it between your fingers, you'll find that it's quite greasy, like an avocado. It's filled with fats and proteins and lipids that our migrating songbirds need as they travel southward for the winter. So they've co-evolved with southern arrowwood and other species like this, where they land in the forest and they gorge themselves on the southern arrowwood berries, and it fuels them for the long trip that they need to make southward. If they land in the forest and there's no more southern arrowwood, they will eat the linden arrowwood. But if you squeeze a linden arrowwood berry between your fingers, what you'll notice is that it's sugary and it's watery. It's almost like candy. It's like sending your child off to school on a can of soda and expecting them to make it through the entire day. So the birds are gorging on the linden arrowwood. They're basically getting sugar water, and they're trying to fly south without adequate fuel. And what happens is they're finding them frozen to the rails of southern lighthouses, where they're too exhausted to lift themselves up and continue their journey. Or if they make it past that, they plummet into the sea on their way to Venezuela. What we plant matters. So we're going to talk a little bit about impacts on climate. I mentioned western wildfires in the description. I'm only going to focus on 3 species. There's a number of species that are impacting western wildfires, but we're going to talk about cheatgrass, Scotch broom, and pampas grass. Cheatgrass was unintentionally brought here, they believe, in ship's ballast or contaminated grain from Europe and Asia. Scotch broom and pampas grass were 2 ornamentals that were introduced for gardening. Our sagebrush steppe is an important biome in the West, and you can see the gray-green sagebrush here, but what this photo should show is bare ground between the sagebrush. The bare ground appears to be bare, but below the surface it's actually full of shallow lateral roots that allow the plants and wildflowers and sagebrush to soak up the sparse rain. What has happened with cheatgrass is it's opportunistic, and it has filled in everything you see there that's sort of a yellowy beige is all invasive cheatgrass that has taken advantage of those spaces in between the sagebrush. And it acts like tinder, like kindling, like if you've ever, it's an annual, so it dries out in the winter. If you've ever taken hair and thrown it into a fire and it just goes up like that. In the foreground of this photo, everything you see that is a pale gray beige, all of that is dried cheatgrass, and it goes on into the distance for as far as you can see. What happens is now all it takes is a spark from a trucker's vehicle where a piece of metal is dragging on the ground, and this is all along the roadsides, and it will light this and ignite the West. The fires are burning hotter, faster, longer, and more frequently because of cheatgrass. And what that's doing is creating a feedback loop where the more carbon we release from all of this burning, the warmer the temperatures, the more the cheatgrass likes it. It's very drought tolerant, so more cheatgrass explodes in population. And when a sagebrush steppe burns severely from this hot inferno created by all of this continuous fuel, the sagebrush can't recover. So sagebrush steppes are no stranger to natural fires, but on a cycle of about a decade, and then they recover in between. But they're now saying, the firefighters are saying, every season is fire season. It's nonstop, year-round, and cheatgrass is a huge component of that. Scotch broom escaped cultivation and is now found throughout the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast, California. Scotch broom is full of natural oils that are highly flammable. And what's happening is it's creating a ladder fuel across these meadows, and it allows the fire, so the plants themselves just light up like a torch, and it allows the connection of the fire up the ladder up into these big majestic trees. This is a prescribed burn. You can see the firefighter on the right. This was a pile of Scotch broom that was deliberately removed, and they lit it on fire for control purposes. But look at the size of the fire truck in the background, and look at the size of this bonfire. That's because of the flammable oils in the Scotch broom. And you can still buy Scotch broom in the store today and put it in your landscaping. Pampas grass was brought here from Argentina, the Argentine pampas, and It is escape. People love to decorate with this, love to landscape out west as well as down south. These dried seed heads are like big feather dusters. You can imagine what happens when you light one of these on fire. They've escaped out into wild areas and they're filling the canyons in California. And they're threatening homes in California and Arizona. They're asking people to please remove these from anywhere near your home. And they cause the fires to continue up the canyons. And oh, look, there's Scotch broom down in the lower right-hand corner as well. So again, causing the fires to burn hotter, faster, longer, and more frequently. So let's bring this back to our eastern temperate forests. And what does this have to do with climate here? You might say, well, western wildfires aren't really impacting me. This is a relatively, I'm not going to say pristine, but relatively uninvaded eastern forest park up in northern Virginia, Donaldson Run. And you can see that our eastern streams and riparian areas are designed to be shaded by a beautiful mix of native trees, and that mix of trees is doing a couple of different things. It's keeping the water cool, which allows for a certain macroinvertebrate population as well as different fish populations. And the mix of leaves is creating what we call a watershed tea. So all of these different native leaves are falling into that stream, and the macroinvertebrate populations are shredding those leaves, and then that becomes the source for the insect life, which then feeds the birds and the spiders and so on. I said we were going to come back to this photograph from Hemet Run. So this runs through McLean on its way down to the Potomac. This is Japanese knotweed. What you can't see is the scale. This is from standing up on a bridge. Here's what it looks like when you're standing right next to it. It's an impenetrable thicket. Wildlife can't get through this. Nothing can grow underneath it. Here's a worker trying to work on this. So what happens, obviously no forest regeneration is taking place next to that stream. And there's a monoculture of Japanese knotweed, which means there's no longer any mix of native leaves falling into that stream. There's only one type of leaf, Japanese knotweed. And so the food sources for that entire life cycle of aquatic ecology that then feeds our birds and terrestrial animals is missing. So again, we have this feedback loop where, and this diagram happens to be western species, but you could translate this to our eastern temperate forests as well. So midwestern species, you would have cottonwoods and sycamores and oaks and ashes shading out the streams, and you see the mix of leaves falling in, feeding the insects that feed the trout and other species, and the number of insects that hatch and the birds. And then what happens is the invasive plant starts to crowd those out, the larger trees die, you get smaller trees, fewer leaf mixtures, fewer fish, insects. Now all you can support maybe is a spider. Tamarisk is one of the species that they're dealing with in salt cedar in the Midwestern states. And so that would be the equivalent, for example, of our Japanese knotweed. And so you end up with these streams that now have nothing but tamarisk growing next to them. And so there's nothing shading or keeping the temperature of the streams. Streams, people don't realize streams and rivers are in the ocean are one of the biggest carbon sinks that we have on the planet. The carbon material falls into them and they hold that as they transport it, but as these streams warm, they are releasing carbon into the atmosphere. As the ocean warms, they're releasing it into the atmosphere. And again, this creates a feedback loop where the more it warms, the less the plants can grow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is why you see so many riparian area tree planting projects. It's really important that we keep our native trees planted along our streams in our watershed. So what plants are invasive in Virginia and who gets to decide? Well, it's not Blue Ridge PRISM. It's the Department of Conservation and Recreation. They recently upgraded the list or updated the list. They're required to do so by law every 4 years. So last September, they added 13 new species to the list. We now have 103. And what I try to impress upon people is that none of these plants made it onto this list because we just didn't like them. These plants have all been through a rigorous scientific protocol that takes years to do these plant assessments. By the time a plant makes it on this list, it is really, really bad. bad. It was very frustrating last year. We had a bill go through, past the House, past the Senate, the retail signage bill, which we've put through again this year with some modifications, which fortunately just passed again, so it's on its way to the governor's office. But the governor vetoed it last year. And one of the comments that he made, the legislation last year referenced this list. We've changed that this year in response to the governor's complaint. But the governor didn't like the fact that vinca, or periwinkle, as you may know it, is on this list. And he said, I don't think that's very invasive. I don't think we should be passing a law that has anything to do with vinca. It's not really a problem. And I shake my head and I said, let me take you to some eastern forests and let me show you the nightmare, or the erosion-controlled slopes. Let me show you the nightmare that periwinkle is causing. So bad. They're on this list, they're bad. 103 plants, roughly 54 of those are what I would call a true weed species, meaning nobody is selling these plants. Japanese stiltgrass, nobody sells Japanese stiltgrass in this country. It's just exploding on its own. In Virginia, people are no longer selling Tree of Heaven because it's a noxious weed, but there are other states like Tennessee where you can still buy Tree of Heaven and have it brought in to Virginia, still considered an ornamental. 49 of these are cultivated and still sold in garden centers or online. What we're trying to do is get legislation passed, hopefully the governor will sign it this year, to at least require signage at the point of sale to educate consumers, because most people are buying these plants and have absolutely no idea that they're invasive. So how can gardeners help? Learn how to identify yellow flag iris. You can still buy this in stores. You can still buy this at Home Depot online and have it shipped here to Virginia. It is invading Theodore Roosevelt National Park swamp up in northern Virginia. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. Every spring you just see a sea of yellow flowers. So I recommend 3 different steps to get positive identification. Get yourself a good plant ID app. I happen to like picture this. Most of the people I know find it has about 85 to 90% that you're going to get the right plant on that. But don't stop there. We have an invasive plant ID control app that is embedded into the Blue Ridge PRISM website, as well as the link to from the Virginia Invasive Plant Coalition website. And on here, you'll get slideshows and comparison photos to native species to help you get a positive ID on a plant that you're looking at, as well as the digital app of the Virginia Flora. I highly, highly, highly recommend this app. So much great information on there. I really encourage you, get curious. So when you're out in your garden and you see something that, hey, wait a minute, that plant wasn't there before, instead of just ripping it out because it doesn't belong, stop for a minute and figure out what it is. How many of you have heard of crow dipper? So this is a brand new, oh my gosh. I took these photos of my dad's property for the last many years. I've been going and spreading mulch for them in their garden. They usually order 70 or 80 bags from the local high school kids fundraising project. And my father is elderly and can't do the spreading anymore. And so one year I'm out there spreading, and then I happened to notice this plant. Caught my attention because the unique shape of these 3 leaves, they remind me, this one's turned a little on its head, but they remind me of like the inside of a peace sign or the inside of a Mercedes-Benz symbol or something. You've got one very clearly largely this way and 2 like that. And I thought, that's funny. I don't remember seeing anything like that. Sure enough, it's a plant called crow dipper. It's a brand new invasive plant. And I thought, how on earth did this get here? They're an isolated property in the woods. It has a small flower that resembles Jack in the Pulpit a little bit, but it's much more thin and fragile than that. Well, come to find out, when it spreads by these little bubbles, it's very fragile stem. The more you pull it, the more it spreads. So you have to try to dig it out and dig wide and deep. I kept trying to get rid of this, and it just kept coming back, coming back. This is another one that spreads through waterways. The waterways pick up these little bulbils and transport them. So you'll see it along stream sides and ditches and drainage areas. It turns out that it is spreading throughout the DMV through mulch deliveries. So these are the hotspots for right now, and oh look, there's a red dot in Harrisonburg. So somebody positively identified this as far down. This is about as far south as it goes, but watch out for those mulch deliveries, soil deliveries, and other things contaminated. And then report sightings. So when you find something new and different, or something that's on what we call the early detection and rapid response list, we encourage you to report it. Either use iNaturalist or use EdMaps, whichever tool is easier for you. Both of those are feeding into scientific databases that we rely on to check the migration of these species. Inventory and remove. Find out what's in your landscape. A lot of us have legacy landscaping. My dad's property is full of vinca and winter creeper. He didn't plant any of those things, but we're working on getting rid of them. Educate and organize. Get your neighbors together. This is a neighborhood crew we put together in McLean for taking over a VDOT right away and removing the invasives from there with permission from VDOT. How many of you are master gardeners? Yay for master gardeners. So last year, Master Gardeners program across Virginia declared it the year of invasives, and we collaborated with them on putting together this educational poster, which is available for you if you want to use that for tabling or other educational presentations. Stop it at the source. Just say no to all of these plants that are still in commerce here in Virginia. All the usual suspects. You can volunteer for nursery surveys in March and April. We're going to be launching the first statewide nursery survey with volunteers. We have a web app developed that you can use on your phone, where you can go and mark off all the invasive species that you see for sale in retail, and you can take pictures and upload them, and we will be publishing that data. I'm not quite sure how we're going to focus on that. We're waiting to see what the governor does. Sign the petition if you haven't already. We're a little over, I think, 85,000 signatures now and counting. Choose native plants. The Plant Virginia Natives campaign has several books across the region. Your region here in Harrisonburg would be your Plant Ridge and Valley Natives. These are fabulous resources for learning what belongs in your region and really help you be successful in planting a native landscape where things will thrive. I will say, as a grower, I get responses all the time for things that people think are pretty, but they're native to Southeast Virginia, and I only grow things that are native to my region. So sometimes explaining to people, really you need to refer to these guidebooks because they're going to help you plant what belongs in your region. Virginia is a very large state with very distinct biomes. And people get frustrated when they try to start out with native plant gardening and they plant the things they think look pretty without realizing, oops, that doesn't belong on my plot of land. If you're a hiker, how many hikers do we have in the room? Avid hikers. Yeah, keep one of these handy dandy little boot brushes, your treads on your shoes, and even a dog brush maybe keep in your car are key vectors for transporting seeds. You can pick these up for a couple dollars on Amazon and just keep it in your glove compartment. It actually makes a really big difference. Likewise, if you're a recreational boater, there's a program called Play, Drain, Go. Make sure that you're not transporting aquatic invasive plants when you move your boat from one location to another. I want to end with a story of hope. This photo is from my father's woods. My father has a small wooded property in McLean, and he's elderly. He doesn't go out in his woods any longer, and so he didn't realize what was happening. And during COVID, I had a lot of time to spend looking after them, shopping for them, and I started going out into the woods. You know, we used to just gather at my dad's house for family events, but we never went outside. He loves the fact that his property doesn't have a single blade of grass and he doesn't have to mow. He loves living in the woods, but he didn't realize his trees were dying. And when I realized what was happening, this you're looking back across his property and into neighbor's property and on down past that, and everything that you can see that's green in this photo is wisteria. Wisteria was never planted on his property, never. We don't know what yard this came in from, but it is going across the back properties in a wildlife corridor of many, many, many homes. So I decided I was going to do something about it. So August 2021, this is where I started. This is chest-high wisteria at the ground level, and it took me months and months, but I cut every single vine, every single piece of this wisteria. After a couple, so you can see it's impenetrable in terms of no sunlight is reaching the soil, nothing native can grow underneath this. It's just an ecological dead zone. So these arrows are all pointing to different vines that are laddering their way up. You can see here's a tree on the right where I removed the vine. You can see how it is girdling the tree. And after a couple months of cutting, I finally made my way back far enough and I found what I refer to as the mother vine. The mother vine on this property was the one that managed to ladder up the smaller of the two trees, make its way up to the canopy of the larger of the two, killed them both in the process. But these are probably 122. Here's what it looked like. I was eagerly anticipating, okay, what's going to happen next? Do I need to plant this area? I reached out to one of our renowned botanists in the state and said, should I be buying wildflower seed? What should I be doing? Do I need to help nature along? And everybody said, no, wait. Just be patient and wait and see what will happen. The ground, or so remember, it looked like the left, now it looked like the right. And the ground looked like this, and I was really impatient. I was thinking, what on earth is going to happen here, or have I created some sort of dead lunar landscape? But just 3 weeks later, by April 13th, look what started to appear. Violets, Virginia jump seed, kidney leaf buttercup, carrots of all kind, Christmas ferns, white avens, goldenrods and asters and red maple and silver maple and black cherry and eastern red cedar and American holly and even pinkster bloom azalea and sweet gum and white pine. All of this was in the seed bank underneath all of that wisteria, just waiting to be released, just waiting for that spring sunshine that it needed to germinate. So that's why I say one vine at a time. We can't do a lot about the craziness that's happening right now in our world, and I won't say anything more than that, you know what I'm talking about. But we can play a role in reversing the spread of invasive plants. This is something that we can actually do something about, and we can impact biodiversity, and we can impact climate, and we can impact the quality of our lives, the price of our food, the price of healthcare, and so many other things. Say it with me. I am the cure. Thank you.